Kevin Gordon here from Autosavant.com with our third part of the video review of the Lexus GS350 all-wheel drive. In this segment, I really want to focus on the technology pieces and specifically, the navigation and interface to that navigation system in the car. The easiest way to sort of go through this is, if you look up here, you get a 12.3 inch LCD screen. It's really big, really clear, nice and bright. That part is excellent. How it's integrated into the dashboard, it's not really too high and it's not too low. They've done a good job of mounting it deep enough into the dash that you never get any issues with sun putting any kind of glare on it. As we go to the more close-in shots, apologies for the rolling shutter on it. We're working on getting that resolved, but for now, some of it might remain when we get to the final published video. So before we get into the actual system, the one thing I did want to focus on a bit was the control device. So Lexus and Toyota, in some ways with the Prius, stand alone in their way that you interact with the system. If we go back to the map screen, you'll see you get a control pad that works a lot like a mouse would on a computer, as well as 3 buttons. You get menu, which takes you back to sort of the home screen and shows you all your options. Map, which obviously takes you back to the map. And if you press it again, you get voice. You get a re-prompt for whatever the last voice prompt was if you're in a navigation setting. And you get a toggle switch that zooms. The toggle switch is a nice feature. It's nice to be able to get in and out of a map really quickly as you're working with it. Menu, of course, makes a lot of sense. The one thing, in my opinion, it's missing is any kind of back button. Because as you get into the screen, so if we're going to show a map, and you want to get back to your map, obviously in this case you could just hit map, but typically you've got to go to this return thing, which requires it instead of a button press, which would really be, I think, the best solution. All right, considering Lexus has laid out, their set of groupings of how they think you'll interact with the system, let's walk through them as Lexus has laid them out. So starting with destination, the navigation of this car seems to be very solid. You can't put in addresses while driving, but you can get to previous destinations and points of interest. You'll also notice that you get destination assist, and that's because Toyota has their own, and apologies to Toyota, but OnStar-like, another satellite-based, human assistance program with crash reporting and all that kind of stuff. You can't actually get on the phone with a real human being and talk through putting in a more detailed address if you can't get it to these two things. So address entry works pretty much like you'd expect it. You choose your state. You can either start with a street address or a city. All that works well. One thing that is nice in here, it's a little thing, but you can choose to have either a QWERTY keyboard, which is named because QWERT, or you can have ABC, in alphabetical. So depending on the age of the driver and their familiarity with a keyboard, you can choose those two things. But I think what's more interesting is actually putting in an address through the voice control, because since you can't do it while you're driving, this becomes a pretty critical aspect. So let's give it a shot here. But as we get into this, you'll notice that when you press the voice button, it always tells you what voice commands it's expecting based on where you are. And that's a pretty handy feature. The other thing is I've got this car set up so it just bings once and you start talking. So basically you just keep talking and it keeps moving through the screens. Let's try something a little bit harder, which is out-of-state address. Enter an address.
Enter an address.
Change state.
Change state.
New Jersey.
New Jersey.
Sea Isle City.
Sea Isle City.
79th Street.
79th.
Start guidance.
Start guidance.
The voice controls working with the system do work quite well. So the next big chunk of, groupings in here is the info and app screen. And the Lexus navigation system is XM based underneath. All these things work pretty much as expected. One thing before we get into the apps piece that is interesting is, even though this whole screen is 12 inches wide, it really typically winds up being split between a left and a right side grouping. So on the right, you always get your music choices, you get climate controls, and you get a bunch of different sort of groupings of information. So this is miles per gallon, cruising range, compass, that type of stuff. One of the things that it's hard to sort of express without being in the car is that when you're in this screen, you get sort of full usage of the control pad. But to jump over to the other side, you have to give it a little sort of nudge. And then once you're over here, it sort of limits the choices. It's a pretty intuitive and smart way to deal with it. What has been a bit, and that's sort of being kind, what's really been a bit of a challenge is the apps section. So Inform is supposed to have this app suite where you install an app on your phone, and in it, it has a bunch of applications then within that application. So you'll notice that the applications running on my phone, we're officially logged in here. I've got set up my account. All should be good. But here it says to use services, an active application needs to be running on your phone. This has happened a lot. And to be honest, if you just keep doing this, eventually it does connect. But then once you get into it, you get a bunch of choices. Pandora, iHeartRadio, Facebook Places, so on and so forth. The Pandora and iHeartRadio, it's the same sort of buggy, painful process to get through it. Now, when we were at the New York Auto Show, we did sit down with Toyota and go through this. It all worked perfectly. So I don't know really what the glitch is here, but I do know that, my iPhone has worked perfectly well with other car-based applications. And, this isn't where the trouble ends. So if we go back to menu, and with media, you'll notice that the Bluetooth audio piece of this is all working as expected. And Bluetooth works great in this car. The setup worked initially. It always reconnects. You can be streaming music through Pandora or whatever else through the actual Pandora app on the phone, not the Pandora app in Inform. And, everything works perfectly. The problem again is you'll notice that you should have a USB option. And I've got an official iPod, iPhone, Apple derived cable, official iPhone, not rooted, nothing else. You connect it, and no matter what I do, I can't get my iPhone. Oh, wait. So you keep getting this message that the connection's successful or not successful. And you'll notice that even though I got a connection, it's not there. So I've actually had to resort to using a 3.5 millimeter aux cable to be able to test the stereo in this car because I can't get my phone to act as an audio source. So those two things, like I said, I don't know what's going on. I haven't called Toyota or Lexus to talk to them about this, to see what's going on. Maybe in the future we'll get this car back after it's had some kind of, refresh to see what's going on. But, both of those things have been disappointing. So what hasn't been disappointed is how high quality the base stereo is in this car. There's a, Mark Levington upgraded premium stereo that isn't installed in this model. This is the, base for Lexus GS350 stereo. But it's really solid. As we go through all of our music tracks, everything really works well. The tweeters mounted up on the dash in the center channel get you a really good front stage. The sound's clear without being, too harsh and bright. Good. I do want to point out that Lexus did do something very smart, which is they put knobs in their car. And, I would love to see some kind of back button with this pad interface, and maybe even, believe it or not, more buttons around it. A lot of companies are going to this 4-quadrant model of you get, phone, radio, navigation, and climate as your sort of 4 major groupings, which, in all honesty, when you get to this interface, that's pretty much what's there. The fact that setup has this much prominence in their navigation and main screen thing, a little weird to me. It seems like destination, info and apps, radio, and once again, Lexus splits radio from media separately. That's a choice. Climate and phone, all that stuff works. I wouldn't, believe it or not, mind seeing even more buttons around this, though. More ways to directly dive into the system. So you do get tuning knobs and volume knobs, and also sort of hidden down here is you do get a radio and a media button, which is a really handy thing. Sure, on the steering wheel, you can go through your listening modes and you get volume over here and you get tuning here. But having real buttons still, in a lot of ways, you just can't beat it. So to sum up the Lexus GS350, and all the pieces, the design of it, the driving experience of it, and the technology and infotainment pieces of it, initial impressions of this car were really, really good. And it's a nice car to drive. I mean, I have to give Lexus a lot of credit. They've made a much better driving car than really anything that I've experienced from them in their normal range again. In the F line, and of course their Halo supercar, the LFA, which we haven't had the chance to drive. Those cars are driver's cars, but this thing really is as pleasant of a driving car as any of the mid-level German cars or the other Japanese lines are out there. In fact, it might be better in a lot of ways. Lexus has done a good job from a ride perspective, balancing something sporty with something that's still refined on the highway. The design pieces of it inside, it's beautiful. I don't think you could ask for a lot more from an interior design perspective. Again, hey, little touches that are plastic, we'd love to see them be metal, but that's a little nitpicky. I think the biggest challenge with this car, and Lexus hasn't had a huge amount of sales success with the GS, is its outward design. In the F Sport, I really like the looks of the car. They've made it more aggressive and made it stand alone. But in the more sedate model, again, it's a little too family Toyota-like, I think, to stand alone, especially for $62,000. Nevertheless, I think if you buy one, you're going to be far from disappointed in it. It's really worth a drive. And, the final piece of that, and without sort of plugging Lexus too much, is the dealer experience, which Lexus does do a very, very solid job of. So I'm Kevin Gordon from Autosavant.com, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.